So the idea of the central idea of actually studying this particular unit at level 3 is to look at two things: to understand and assess your academic and research skills at level 3. That would mean that what we want to do is identify your key strength areas, your weakness areas. What are the areas you find that you have, skills in already, which kind of present opportunities, and the areas that you have not yourself kind of realized are areas of threat. That means a gap areas essentially, which could become potential threats for you as you study further in your career, or maybe gain another, a further qualification. Now, after we have done the SWOT analysis, what we're going to be looking at is getting into something called, once we know clearly that, these are my areas which I need to improve, or the gap areas that I need to work on, then what we will need to do is identify certain, types of training, or certain, let's put it this way, things that we will have to do by putting together some smart objectives around it and develop it into a personal development plan. And that personal development plan will be a working document which you normally use for 12 to 18 months to try and write down and kind of summarize your current skill set with the current strengths, and the areas that you feel you have good knowledge about. And then you also write down the points or the areas in which you need to gain knowledge, you need to increase your knowledge, or as we call it, you need to hone your knowledge in terms of better your skills and your knowledge. And this document is what we keep updating for a period of 12 to 18 months till you achieve that it is in terms of improvement. So what I'm going to do is, we are going to look at PDP and SWOT in particular, and that is what I'm going to open up with. And I'll show you two examples just to begin with. So I'm going to try and send you this particular discussion that we are doing today will actually look at covering learning outcome 1, which is to be able to assess your own academic competence, and learning outcome 6, which would mean that once we've identified the areas of areas that we need to work on, improve on, or gain skills on, how do we look at reflecting our own performance in terms of over the 6-8 week period, to try and see if there is a change which has happened, or if we've been able to acquire those skills. There is also something called skills audit that I would ask you to undertake, and I will also show you a bit of a template on that to understand how this audit is done.
Right.
Today's session will primarily look at understanding how do we do these things and how do we utilize these documents. So I'm going to show you 3 documents in particular, just to summarize again. One will be a SWOT analysis document, the other will be a personal development plan, and the third one will be something called skills audit. Now, there are various tests that we can do to kind of understand what is our behavior, the attitude, how you react. And these are various tests that we can also do, and I'll point you in the direction of a few websites wherein you can go in and do these tests. These tests basically look at asking you multiple choice questions. Some of the questions are repetitive, and these questions then basically come to some sort of an analysis after they have been answered, in terms of arriving at what is your personality type, what are your key strength areas, what are your traits, how you behave in a certain situation. And these tests are done in organizations sometimes when you go and apply for jobs. So when they are recruiting for people to look at, or essentially when they're trying to recruit people or staff within the organization, and they want to see that whether the person will be able to gel into the culture and the environment of that organization, sometimes you will see that some organizations end up asking you to do these tests so that they have a better idea in terms of your personality and your qualities that they tend to then match with the internal set that they have prepared in terms of what type of employees they want to recruit, or what type of qualities do they want in their employees from that particular angle. And some of these tests, by the time the documents open up, so these are called Myers-Briggs Foundation tests. So these are free personality tests that you can do, and some of them, essentially are between 10 to 15 questions long, take about anywhere between 5 to 12 minutes to complete, and these then will give you a bit of a kind of summary in the background in terms of what shapes up your personality. Now there are various types, so obviously we will look at, I'll send you the links, which primarily will be looking at you understanding by taking this test in terms of what kind of personality you are, and what are the skills that personality type has. And then if you're looking at developing those skills, what are the areas and how would you develop these skills is what we will look at. So if you do a quick search, obviously on personality tests, you will normally see a lot of them up. But, these were invented by, obviously two scientists called Myers and Briggs, and they are the most, popular ones which you can end up taking, because in most cases, most organizations would look at, have paid versions of these personality tests at different levels. So if they are recruiting somebody at the very basic level in terms of the organization, they will have simple tests. Somebody, if they are looking at recruiting at senior management or maybe a CEO in the organization, the tests would be very detailed, and they will delve into each and every aspect of the personality of the person, the skill set, the knowledge, the experience, and a lot of other such parameters, which when you take some of these tests, give you some idea. Sorry.
Okay.
So the main thing that we want to look at primarily would be to understand. I know that in the marketing unit, when we looked at some of these models called SWOT and PESTEL. Now we have applied these models in particular to business situations or economic climate. But sometimes we also do our own SWOT analysis and also look at say for example, I wouldn't say best, but we will look at some of these personality tests to try and drill into in terms of finding out what makes us tick. And this is where we will start off with the first document. Give me 1 second. So the third one we'll look at is the SWOT. Now, skills audit in particular, you can do in different, different shapes and sizes in terms of, different qualities and different aspects of, the audit can be done. But I'll show you one in particular. that was done by one of our students earlier. And that was quite pertinent. Yeah. So let's look at some of these documents in a bit more detail. Let's go one by one. Now, what I wanted to do was open one up, which is so here is what we looked at. Say, for example, let's start with SWOT, okay? Now, here, what I would suggest you look at is from an academic standpoint of view, you're looking at identifying your strengths. So when I send this across to you, what you have to do is parallelly using maybe some sort of bullet points here. You have to identify your strengths. So if I have to ask you this question, what are your strengths? What would you tell me from that aspect?
I'd say I have patience, I have respect, I have ambition.
Okay, so that's fine. And that's okay. That's a good start. So let me put this into some sort of working notes just to do this as an exercise while we go along. So when we look at, say, for example, strengths, you know, what we are looking at in particular is your qualities, right? So when you think of strength, you think of your qualities, right? Correct. So when we think of qualities, you mentioned some of the qualities would be, you know, like you are respectful. You know, what else did you mention?
Ambition.
Okay. What else can you think of? So think of academic qualities that you would kind of qualify or, you know, put them into strength areas.
Patience. So I don't give up easily.
Okay. So that would be, say, if you don't give up easily, that will be persistence. Persistence, okay. Persistence is that you keep trying until you achieve, or, you know, you're able to kind of, you know, achieve that task or finish that task. Now, you would look at qualities like persistence. You would look at qualities, if you say patience, for example, you know, which would mean that you are calm and, you know, composed in situations which typically, you know, would kind of disturb other individuals, or they might lose their temper, and those would be qualified or classified as something called, you know, your strength areas. Now, strength areas are nothing but, you know, abilities that you are able to do effortlessly. It could be because of your physical strength. It could be because of your mental, you know, abilities. And those are things that you will consider primarily as, you know, your strength areas. Sorry. So in terms of, when you think of, you know, strengths, think of physical plus mental abilities. So in terms of when we say persistence, this would you classify as a personal or a mental ability?
A mental.
Mental ability, that's correct. So patience will also be classified as something called mental ability. That means, you know, you are generally calm and composed. Now, can you think of some physical capabilities which will primarily be, you know, your strength areas?
Physical. Physical.
Think of it from a point of view of, you know, strength areas which people actually highlight, you know, in their CVs.
So, physical. I can't think of any, sir.
All right, okay. So in this case, for example, when you think of strength areas from a point of view of being physical, what you're looking at is that you are able to, for example, make progress on, or, you know, look at, let's put it this way, make progress on certain sometimes what we have to do is, let's put it this way, I'll give you a situation. For example, when you have a sports day, or some sort of an activity happening in the school, or maybe in a workplace, sometimes you will get to see that people, when they form teams, they will form teams from a point of view of choosing their own, kind of choosing support to get into their own team, because they will feel that this particular person will be able to come in and physically aid, or be more physically challenging, will pose a physical challenge in a situation like this. So for example, if you look at a situation like tug of war, or if you look at a situation wherein you're playing a match, sometimes you need physical abilities which are also counted as strength areas. So we, in that aspect, say that sometimes we do use the word that I'm emotionally quite strong, though it means a mental ability, that you're emotionally very strong. But what you're trying to say is that, okay, I'm emotionally very strong because I can take any form of news, or any form of sad, or kind of deal with any sort of situation from that aspect, wherein that would be considered as a physical ability rather than just being a mental ability. Is that okay?
Yeah.
The other areas would be as if you're participating in a physical activity, which could be to do with that you're probably doing gardening, or you're probably helping out, your elders, or maybe somebody like friends and family, somebody's moving home, for example, and you're kind of helping out in terms of, moving home. That would need that they need somebody who's coming in and helping out in terms of, physical ability of strength area. Now, when you think of weaknesses, what do you look at when you think of weaknesses?
Weaknesses.
Yeah.
So the qualities that you don't have.
Yeah, it could be the qualities that you don't have. So here, if I have to look at, certain areas in which you would need development, that could be qualities. Now, from an academic point of view, sometimes when we list out, weaknesses, we could probably say communication skills. I have good communication skills, but I could always do with improving some of those skills. So sometimes when I say I have very good written or spoken communication skills, so sometimes in the weakness areas, what you say is, okay, I am good with spoken English, but I am not that good with spoken English. That means, or written, sorry. So spoken English is fine, but written English for me needs a bit more, practicing, and obviously I need to perfect that technique. So if I have to ask you to write a business letter or a formal application, you might be okay in terms of your writing, but when it comes to business communication or business writing, which is requiring a formal letter or a formal notice that you have to send, or a formal email, that could be an area wherein you are good on English, your skills and vocabulary are fine in terms of speaking and communication, but when it comes to writing specifically like a business communication letter or an email, that might be an area of weakness that you would want to kind of improve on, right? So if when we say I have a weakness, that would not necessarily mean that all the areas that you look at would be areas in which you'll either be very, very strong, or you'll be very weak in, but it could be areas wherein a particular section or a particular type of area might just be considered a weakness. Now, when I look at the reason I'm coming back to academic again is, see, we can do a SWOT analysis from lots of different aspects. One, we can do an analysis from a point of view of looking at, your comparison with somebody else. But in some cases here, from the context of the unit that we are studying, here we want to look at doing a SWOT analysis from a point of view of academic skills or academic area, and the skills that you have within this academic area. That means within the study area. So here, some of the skills could be that we will look at would be things like time management. If I have to look at, say, for example, your strength, that means time management could be one of your areas of strength, that if given some tasks, or given the situation wherein you have to manage a number of tasks in a particular amount of time, you're able to kind of manage that. And because you're able to manage multitasking well, and you're able to do it in a particular time, that means you have good time management skills. And these time management skills would be, if you do it time and again and you're able to complete it on time, and this, then at some point in time you become very confident with that, okay, given this, if I have to go for a meeting or if I have to meet somebody, I'm always on time or before time, then this is an area of strength. Now, if I have to reverse this and I have to put it this way, that okay, in some cases, if you arrive late on meetings, you arrive late, for example, to the office or to your workplace, something like that, then in that case, this would then become an area of weakness, because this is something which is happening time and again over a period of time. And because you're not able to manage it successfully, that means this is an area of improvement. And that is why we call it an area of weakness. So I could also write this particular time management for me could be a strength, could also be a weakness, depending on the situation in which you are evaluating it. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Now, in terms of, again, the other things that we could think of would be things like, say, communication. Now, I am very good on, say, spoken English, or you're very good on, for example, written English. But in some cases, when it comes to, say, doing formal uh, writing in terms of business English, I might be, uh, um, I might need help in terms of understanding the format and the way in which letters are drafted or emails are drafted, because it uses a particular vocabulary or text and certain words which kind of emphasize and, then portray the message. So business writing skills could be business writing, for example, when I say skills, not generalizes, business writing, which would mean, say, letters and emails, is something that I might need, this is an area where I might need to develop my skills. Is that okay?
Right, yeah.
So in terms of, sometimes when you think of situations wherein we look at what are the other areas which could be skills that we say are strength areas, could be things like, if you are given a situation and you're able to manage it well, you're able to gel with other colleagues or other people in that situation quite well, you're able to get consensus. So some of these skills would be called, say, organizational skills, or say planning skills.
Right.
What is organizational skill? If you're given a plan and you said, okay, sometimes what we get to see is, I'll give you a recent example of my kids. For example, last week was half term and they got, a kind of a note to raise some money for charity. Now, obviously, this was given across to a section of students in the class. The one raising the highest amount of money will get a gold medal. The one raising the second highest would get a silver, and the one raising the third highest would be the bronze. Now, the idea was they were given a very basic understanding of what they have to do. So it was a part of the exercise was to read why the money was being raised, understand the cause, and then go out and seek, charitable donations from people who would kind of, give you some money for raising for this charity. Now, what they had to do was they had to basically understand the situation. After understanding it, they had to plan who they will approach so that they can get that charity and or donation coming in, and that required a bit of organizational and planning skill. So sometimes you're given tasks in the office, or when you're at your place of work, sometimes your boss or your manager would say, can you do this, can you do that, and you get very little guidance to be able to do what is required or what is not required to be done. But then you put together a plan yourself, and that plan that you put together, you go through a certain number of steps to make sure that you reach the end objective or achieve the goal, requires you to do some planning. And those would be considered, if you're able to do this in lots of situations, and that would mean that you are able to kind of plan it well and get to the end result. That means you have good planning skills. Is that okay?
Right, that's fine.
So here, what we want to be able to look at is areas. Say, for example, sometimes you say, I'm flexible and adaptable. Now, what I'm giving you here is an example of some of the strength areas which are professional and some of them are personal. So here what we're talking about is strengths which could be treated as professional traits, or strengths which could be treated as personal traits. That means time management is more or less required when you work at a place, you go to an office. So here, if your time management is good, is considered to be a professional skill that you have, and that if you're able to manage time complete your work, plan it well, and then achieve the goals, you generally are seeming to say, you can generally assume that you have good time management skills. So this will be considered a professional skill under strength area. But when I say I am flexible and I'm adaptable, that would mean this is more or less related to your personality. And here is where you are able to work with all types of people, all coming from different types of background. And here, because of your adaptable nature, you are having an area of strength, which is adaptability, but that becomes a personal area of strength, or can be classified as a personal trait, but under the strength area. Do you see the difference?
Yeah.
Yeah. So here the idea would be to try and do a SWOT analysis about yourself and think of your strength areas from both professional traits as well as personal traits. Now, if I have to give you and ask you a question, how would you classify problem solving as an area in terms of what would you say? Is this a personal or a professional trait that we are looking at?
Professional.
Right, that's correct. So problem solving would mean that if you are given a set of constraints to work with, you're able to work out solutions to that particular problem and still achieve the objective. So if you're able to do this time and again in your daily routine or in your job, then in general you can say or safely assume that you have problem solving skills, and they seem to be a strength area with you, because without much supervision or without much guidance, you're able to come to solutions for problems or things which are issues, at the workplace. Now, other areas. So there are some other areas that you can think of, and these areas could be, say, for example, teamwork. It could also mean that you are dependable. Sometimes people say that he's reliable, he's dependable, or she's reliable, she's dependable. And again, this is an example of a personal trait, but again can be considered as strength areas, because your colleagues, when they work with you or you work within a team, they can depend on you because you can look after them in terms of if the work has to be achieved or has to be completed. Sometimes if somebody is lagging behind, then you are able to step in and you're able to provide that helping hand, so that the entire team goes through, as against somebody getting left behind. So these are areas that you will classify primarily as something called self areas, which could be personal or professional, but would be classified as I would say classified as something called strength areas. Now, other things that you could look at, which I would suggest just to put some words and give you some idea, would be things like discipline. When we talked about persistent, in particular, when we talked about this particular trait, this could be, a personal trait. It could be resilient, which means that you are, if you're faced with adversity, you do not face, you kind of do not turn your face away, or you kind of face the situation and try and come out fighting, or try and deal with it. You could also look at skills like persuasive. That means you're able to persuade people to be able to come along with you. There are things like integrity, as we talk about, that this person is loyal, is quite has an integrity in terms of the character, and this could be a personal area of strength, but it's a personal trait, but again considered under a strength area. So these are all things that you'll have to list down under the SWOT analysis by thinking carefully about what could be your strength areas, and divide them into professional and personal. So list out at least 5 professional traits under strength and 5 personal traits under the strength area. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, similarly, when we look at, weaknesses, how do we look at, say, defining weaknesses? So if I look at weaknesses, in this case would be, things like, just give me one second. So things like, So when I look at weaknesses could be, areas that you look at in particular, which would mean that, you know, just give me 1 second, Kasim, I need to take this call, yeah?
Yes, fine.
Hector, how are you doing? You okay? Sure. No, Matthew Parkin is something that we don't need that urgently because I think the others at level 7 are the ones that we need to submit to university today. Sure. I think if it's a PDF, it must be all, but you might only be able to see one, maybe on the phone or something. Sure. No, he mentioned that to me. He said that I will pass it on to Hector and then he will email it to you. So I need them by 4 or before 4, to be honest, to be able to pass them on to the university. Really appreciate this, Hector. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks. Bye. Sorry about this, Kasim.
That's fine.
I had a call from the awarding body, so that was it. No. Now, in the weakness areas, what we're primarily going to look at is basically areas that we look at, which are areas or traits that we look at for development. Now, sometimes, I've given you a brief example here, says that when we look at speaking, for example, communication, for example, sometimes what you do is you do not you are in a situation wherein you're not able to communicate well, or you are in general communicating well with colleagues or peers who are at the same level, but when it comes to communication to senior management, you're not able to communicate well because you do not have the experience to be able to communicate or speak to maybe somebody senior enough in the management. Now those then could be areas which sometimes you consider as areas wherein you need improvement or you need to look at improving, and these areas would be classified under areas which are called primarily weakness areas. Is that okay? So my suggestion to you would be here when we look at weakness areas in particular, there are two ways of looking at it. One is we can look at some of these areas that we see here on the strength side could be listed in the opposite side from a point of view of weakness, and in some cases this is something that could be looked at entirely differently. So give me a minute. So for example, let's look at, when I say formal writing, or let's look at business writing in this case, specifically letters and emails, in terms of how do we write business communication could be an area which you need improvement on. Some of the other areas that you could look at from your point of view, what can you think of areas which will be areas of improvement?
Overall.
Yeah, overall.
I'm not dedicated enough.
Okay, that's fine. So again, within this, what I would suggest is you could have some personal traits which could be areas of weakness, and some could be professional traits. So when you say not dedicated enough, would be probably looking at personal traits in particular. What can you think of professional traits?
Professional traits, my communication skills.
Okay, so here we could generally write, say, communication skills. People would also look at, say, the use of, say, for example, IT. It could be that you're good with Windows 7, good with Windows XP, or maybe very good with tablets and things like that. But you might need some professional training on using, say, MS Word, Microsoft Word. So in Microsoft Word, I could say that, okay, man, one of my areas that I want to look at is how do you mail merge? When you send across the same communication to a number of people using a facility in Word called mail merge, or the use of macros, as we call it, which allows you to automate certain things that you're doing in your Word documentation. would be an area of weakness. That means that is an area that you want to develop going further as you start to work with Microsoft Word as a software and start to use the advanced features of the software. Now, some of the other things that we look at in weaknesses could also be termed as areas wherein, if improved on, they can then become opportunities. Now, when I look at that here, some of the one of the examples that I would give out primarily would be looking at, if I had, say, for example, you're applying for a job and you're able to, you come to the interview and all, they in the interview basically say, okay, I think you've got the right experience, you fit all the required descriptions and the qualities which are required in the job, but if you had this particular qualification, we would have taken you on pretty much straight up front, or given you an offer. But because you do not seem to be having this qualification and also prior experience, this is something we will not be able to take, and we will have to ask you to we'll have to decline you as a candidate. Now, this in particular means that if you had that qualification which was required to meet the criteria for the job, you would have had that job in terms of being successful. So here, opportunities would be classified as opportunities would be classified as, I would say, areas, if you can improve, then they can make a significant change in your situation. So an example would be that if I had, say, a certificate in leadership, for example, at level, say a certificate in leadership, forget the label. Now, if I had that certificate in leadership, I could have been selected as a team leader for this particular role. So having that certificate in leadership gives you the opportunity to catapult your career from being a team member to a team leader, and that presents an opportunity. So here, the opportunity is that if I had education, or say, for example, a particular certification for this area, that would have meant that I could have made this into, this would be classified as not as a weakness, but as an opportunity. So assuming I can complete this education or achieve this certification, in the future, I have lots of opportunities that I can apply for this position. Do you see the difference between the weakness and the opportunity?
Yeah, that's definitely.
So weakness here is basically looking at, an area which will take a period of time or an amount in weeks and months for you to be able to achieve that particular skill, and that would then become a strength area. And after that, going forward, you'll be able to utilize it in any shape or way possible. An opportunity would mean that if you're able to get hold of that, or if you had that particular qualification or had that particular skill, that would pretty much give you an instant, ability to be able to jump into a particular position.
Right.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Just 1 second. Let me just text him.
Yeah, it's fine.
So here, my suggestion to you would be, when I send you this particular template, what you have to do is basically look at identifying your areas in terms of strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats. Now, in terms of when I look at opportunities, in particular, these will be areas which will basically give you a significant rise or a boost in your current situation, provided you have them. So this is something which can be achieved over a short period of time, and once achieved, would then allow you to, kind of start applying for different positions, or maybe get a raise in salary, or get a better job or a promotion. and those would be classified as opportunities. Now, a simple example that I would give you is sometimes when you say that, okay, I can get better job opportunities if I try and apply in the Middle East, for example. Now, the reason why people say that is because they feel the experience that they have is relevant here, but is also relevant in other geographies. And because the skills that they've acquired over a point in time become transferable, they then present opportunities for them to be able to, seek higher compensation or higher wages in a particular, situation. And those would be then classified as opportunities from that side. Okay?
Right.
Okay. Now let's look at understanding threat areas. Now, when we look at in particular areas which are threats, what are your threats? What do you perceive as threats? What do you say, or what does come to your mind when you think of, when I think of the word threat, just as a word itself in terms of its definition?
Something that can be a danger to you.
That is correct. So basically, threat would be, definition-wise, if I look at it, basically means there's a statement or an intent to cause harm or cause pain or some sort of an injury. Now, sometimes you get to see in personal situations is that people, when they become angry or become agitated, they basically then react and say, okay, if you come any closer, I'm going to hit you. So they are basically making you aware of a situation that it's come to such an alarming level that at some stage they have an intention or an intent to stop you from further proceeding by threatening you. So threats essentially would mean that these are areas wherein you can feel personally. When I look at the SWOT analysis, threats to you would mean that personally here these are things which can cause damage, which can or have the ability to cause some sort of a damage, from a point of view of either a particular situation like a job situation, personal situation, and those are areas that we need to identify as areas of threat. So sticking to the theme of education and job, if I look at a threat area, one of the threat areas could be that, okay, given the time frame, for example, you're doing a job and your employer has asked you to complete an education or say, for example, a particular certification. Now, if you're not able to complete that certification or achieve that certification in terms of qualification, you see this as a threat area, which means you could be losing your job, right? So when we see people working within project management or within construction site, sometimes you get to see that they take on a lot of people, but what they do say is that subject to you completing this training, your job or your contract would be renewed for another 3 months. Now, that means when they say subject to you completing, is indirectly, in a very subtle way, implying to you that you do not have this particular qualification and you need to be able to complete this in the next 3 months should you wish your contract to be renewed. So this is then perceived as an area of threat, is that if I do not have that qualification with me in the next 3 months, then in that case what will happen is that I will not have a renewal of my contract, and that would mean that I might end up losing my job. Correct?
Right.
Is that clear enough?
Yeah.
So these are areas which you can perceive as areas of threat. That means I they have the potential to cause harm, or kind of say, when I say harm, it could be injury, or looking at slowing down the process. Say, for example, when I say slowing down the process, it could be if you're in line or due for a promotion, provided you do not have that qualification, it might slow down the process in terms of you being promoted or getting a salary rise, something like that.
Right. Yeah.
So here is what we need to look at is, let's identify certain areas which are, let's say, threat areas, from a point of view of your CV. Now, are there any areas in your CV that you have put in from a point of view of areas that you have no knowledge in, or are kind of unknown to you?
No, I don't think so.
Right, okay. So let me give you some, ideas on that side. Now, if you are trying to apply for a job and that job basically says or is asking for a particular type of, say, qualification, and if you do not have that qualification, that means would you try and apply for the job? Would you try and, not apply for the job? What would you do?
You're not going to apply for it because you won't be able to do the job then.
Correct. So this is something which is uncontrollable, factor when you're applying for that job. That means this is beyond your control. Now, either you have that qualification or you do not have that qualification. And the reason why this is uncontrollable is this is external to you. That means this is something that you do not have control on, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
here, the external factor which kind of deters you from applying for that job, because they put down that you need a minimum of a merit in the degree to be able to apply for this job, or this particular qualification you need to have to be able to meet the criteria before you apply for the job, is then considered as a threat, right? Now, sometimes you will also see that when we use the word external, so anything which is not within your control will be classified as an area of threat when you do your SWOT analysis. So things like changing market situation. Now you're doing currently a course in business, but suddenly you find that there is a lot of demand for health and social care, IT, and other things. Then this is changing not overnight, but this is changing because the market is changing, and this is something which is external to you than being internal or within your control, and that is why it will be classified as a threat. Sometimes we would say that in the job interviews or in other places, they classify that if you're applying for example, a IT job, they would say that you need to have knowledge of, say, Python or Visual C as a programming language. Now, if you do not know programming and you do not know these languages, you might know other languages, but you might not know these two languages, then these will be considered as, threats to you, because these are technological things which have been put in, technological things which have been put in into the job specification, which you do not have control on, technological specs. So this is considered, say, for example, a threat in terms of in your case, when we look at professionally, that you do not have this particular competency, and because you do not have this particular competency, this is considered as a threat area. So what we generalize, what I'm trying to come to is, when we put threats across, what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at areas which are external to you, which are beyond your control, and which can affect not just you but can also affect others because of the nature of the requirement for that particular job role. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
That does not necessarily mean that this is a gap area within your personality or your skills or your knowledge, but this is something which is mandatory as a requirement, required for that particular role, and this would not just apply to you but can also apply to others, because this is considered an area which is external and beyond your control. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
We could also put things like, sometimes you see, again continuing with the theme of employment, sometimes you get to see that there are two companies and the companies are merging. So for example, Booker's Wholesale in the recent couple of months has been acquired by Tesco. Now there's a lot of reshuffling which will happen because they would want to make savings, to some redundancies which will happen within the companies, because on both sides there'll be some set of people which will be doing the same roles, and what they would want to do is basically narrow down on people to make some savings, and that would mean redundancies. Now whether which side of let's put it this way, which people will become redundant, whether they'll be on Tesco's side or on Booker's Wholesale side, will depend on the competencies those people have, and those competencies will have to be judged by HR through a process, and they will then look at people who do not have those competencies to be made redundant. Now, if then somebody is looking at doing that analysis, they would then look at people who have the right qualities, the traits, and obviously the skill set, which going further would would be beneficial, would be the ones which will be retained, and the others would primarily mean that um, they would primarily stay on because they have qualities which primarily are required in the changed side of the company or change side of the operations, and they would then tend to have more strengths and more qualities or skills which are considered as strength areas, opportunity areas, as against weakness oblique threat areas. The ones which they feel will not have qualities or requirements of those skills going further would be put into a redundancy list. And that area, because it's external to the person's experience and the decision making that they are going to follow, would be considered as threats. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
So I think in the first instant, my suggestion to you would be, I would suggest that for today, basically look at, when I send you this particular sheet, I'm going to save this and send this to you, is to look at doing some SWOT analysis on yourself, with regards to your personality, and look at understanding how this can be done from a point of view of some of the skills that you have, or some of the experience that you have with you in yourself. Now, the other thing that we will look at is very briefly, there's a skills audit which I would say that you could do. Now, a skill audit is something which is to look at getting some feedback from others about your abilities. So here you could look at a number of abilities. Now, this is a template, but what I'm going to do is basically show you some which a student has previously done. Now, what he did was he looked at certain areas when he wanted to get some feedback on his communication skills only. The key area that has been chosen is just the communication skills, or which directly relates to his personality. And in this, what he did was he chose certain areas like body language, tone of voice, delivery of voice, facial expressions, and use of ICT or use of technology. And in that, he invited his colleagues to rate him on a 4 rating kind of a scale, like poor, average, good, or expert. So am I an expert in use of IT? And then they rated him on the basis of what they thought was the skill level or the competence of that person. So this can be done, obviously I would suggest that you kind of make something up and then maybe ask some of your friends and family members to rate you on. And this is an area that you want to take a bit of feedback, and this feedback will be called something called a skills audit, where you are going to be benchmarked, or you are going to be given certain points by people who know you, and then in those areas they will do a bit of ranking or rating for you to see that this is where you stand according to their understanding. And this typically is something called a skills audit. Is that okay? Now, you could choose the areas that you want to choose. It could be anything from areas in terms of IT, for example. You could choose some of the areas which are your strength areas, your weakness areas, your opportunity and your threat areas, and ask them to rank or give you some kind of a score on that, to see what they perceive of you in those areas which you classify as strength or weaknesses or opportunities or threats. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
So I'm going to try and send you this particular template as well, just to have a look, so that you know what are the areas that you would want to kind of look at as a template, and then draft something of your own to get some feedback from others about your skill areas. Okay. The word skills audit, when I look at the word skills audit itself, it gives the meaning away that you're trying to seek some sort of a feedback on your skills from others. And these could be any sort of skills that you want to look at. Sometimes people, they look at basically this as a process to identify gap areas in particular. So when you look at, say, for example, you want to identify your weaknesses or in particular areas that you need to develop or improve on, then sometimes people will end up doing a skills audit. And what they will do is they will kind of give this out as a bit of a survey, which their colleagues, peers, or near dear ones could actually fill up and then provide it back. And then you tabulate it, and then you find out, okay, according to, say, 5 people have given, 3 of them felt that my use of IT is excellent, so I have good knowledge about tablets, computers, and IT. So you don't put the specifics down, but you can drill into specifics also, depending on what kind of, how much detailed feedback you want, or how much detailed kind of reference point you want from others when they rate you on your skills. So skills audit is nothing but it's a process through which you kind of look at identifying your gap areas, and this is normally a technique which is used by people within organizations, or when you work within a particular role within a company or a business or an organization. And the outcome of this allows you to essentially put this into some sort of a plan for training and development. So you will see within organizations, the HR department normally does this audit by sending across surveys and questionnaires to the employees at the end of the year. And what they look at is they try and gauge the level of skills which the employees have to be able to perform effectively in that job or that job role. And basis that, what they do is because some of these in the background have what you call some sort of numbering, and basis the numbering or the score that you get, the HR department then tailors training and development for you for specific programs, so that you can improve on some of these gap areas and build on skills which will help you effectively work in your role. Is that okay? So this is a very important technique, and this can be put to use in various situations. And sometimes you will see that within organizations, as an example, would be that a lot of colleagues who work together in a particular, say, a particular role or a department like sales, would say that this person is very aggressive. Now, why does everybody say that this person is quite aggressive in its tone or it's in the behavior? Is that they perceive that in situations when there is a discussion, brainstorm, or in general a get together happening, the person tries to assume a dominant position and does not allow others to, for example, contribute or speak in that discussion. Now that is where they feel that the person is aggressive. But the HR department, in order to confirm that notion or that opinion, will do a skills audit or maybe some sort of an audit through which this will be, as of now, which is maybe more or less an impression that everybody carries. But in order for that impression to be confirmed into some sort of a finding, they will do some sort of an audit amongst the peers and the employees in that department to find out if that is something true or not. And this can be done through the process of something called audit. Is that okay? And in the case, if you're trying to find out about the skills, it will become a skills audit. If I give you an example of accounting, for example, at the end of the year, HMRC might come in and check the accounts of a particular company, or an accounts manager in a particular department, but I might ask for the budget and expenditure from a particular department like marketing and sales. This would then constitute an audit that they want to do. They want to reconcile, look at how much has been spent, how much has been spent where, and whether that has led to any justifiable increase in terms of sales or output would be considered a accounting audit or a marketing audit or a sales audit. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
So I think what we want to do is basically look at these 2 templates, which I'm going to send to you, to try and understand and do your SWOT analysis for today, and also look at doing a bit of skills audit to find out what are the areas and how you rate in these areas with regards to maybe your near dear ones and your family. Right. And then finally, we will do is we will get into something called, when I look at reviewing this and I make a plan to kind of develop this going further. So I want to kind of look at, okay, there are some areas which would have, say, for example, after the skills audit I've done, after the SWOT analysis I've done, there are some areas which come out to be weakness areas, areas like I need maybe more development on communication or business writing skills, for example. I need development or, increase my knowledge on negotiation, for example. Some of the skill areas which which I require definitely when I get into a job, but these are areas that I need development on. These areas will, these areas of weakness or these areas of opportunities will actually then be converted into something called SMART goals. And SMART is a word or an acronym that we will get to use quite often. So SMART basically stands for, an acronym which is, so when I look at specific, you look at measurable, look at achievable, R stands for realistic, and T stands for time bound. Now, most of all, you will get to hear this term time and again when you work within an organization, even when you study up in, in the courses at level 4, 5. You'll always see that your teachers, your tutors, your boss, wherever, whatever place of work you work in, they always ask you to set something called SMART objectives. Now, SMART objectives are objectives which primarily are looking at, you being able to set objectives which are specific, so not too generic. Like if I say I want to, you can have objectives on personal and professional front. Now, on the personal front, you say, okay, I want to, just as an example, a lot of people made New Year resolutions, when we had the New Year a couple of weeks back, a lot of them made resolutions that they will stop drinking tea or not have tea or reduce weight and things like that. But when they say stop drinking tea, or not have this or not have that, or basically say reduce weight, this all seems quite generic because they haven't specified from where to where they will do. So if you're looking at reducing weight, you've not defined what your current weight is and you will bring it down by how much. If you say I'm going to stop drinking tea, that means you have 4 cups of tea a day or 5 cups. How much are you going to reduce in terms of consumption? Some of them say that sometimes, okay, I will start jogging or, I'll do this, but just an idea in terms of these objectives being very generic because they have not specified something called a starting point or an end point. Is that okay? So when you say your objectives have to be specific, that means we have to define them well, so we know what is the start and what is the end point. Similarly, we look at measurability, we look at achievability, realistic, and time bound. Now, I'm going to stop drinking tea. That's fine. You're going to stop drinking, but over a what period of time? Is it going to be immediately? Is it going to be from tomorrow? Is it going to be slowly or gradual reduction? So those are things that you have to define when we talk about SMART. Now, the areas which are weakness areas and areas which are threat areas would then be classified into something called SMART objectives, and they will be brought together something onto a plan called personal development plan. And this is where you're making a review document which will help you review it every quarter, every 3 months, every 6 months, every year to see what kind of progress you're making. And here is where what you will do is you will say, what do I need to do, or what I need to learn, and why do I need to learn? So you need to define this in this column. So here, if you say that I want to learn, I want to improve my communication skills, but you have to define why do you want to improve your communication skills, and in what area you want to improve your communication skills. Once you've done that, then you have to drill it further and say, what will it help me achieve? So having better business writing skills would mean that I would be able to do 1, 2, 3, 4 things, right? Now, after you've done that, what you identify is what are the resources you need to achieve that. Do you need to attend any classes? Do you need to buy any books? Do you need to do any, studies for that? And if you have to show improvement, what are the basic things which will help you improve that will have to be listed here. And at some stage, what will happen is you will have to define how will you measure the success criteria. That means if you're achieving that, then why have you achieved it or how you're achieving it. Is it outside of work? Are you putting in some additional time for this? Have you set aside some time for this? And then you put some sort of a target date towards the end. The target date would mean that, okay, if I've started this, to make it time bound as an activity, I need to be able to achieve it by such and such date. And that would help you to have something in front of you as a benchmark that I'm going to start this activity, I'm going to end it here, and this is the time frame in which you have to end it. And then you do a backward planning, which will allow you to fill all these tasks in, columns in essentially. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I think let's start off with these 3 documents for today to understand and do a SWOT analysis, to do a skills audit. And in the next session, what we're going to do is try and revisit, once you have emailed your SWOT to me and your skills audit to me, what we will do is try and put that into some sort of a PDP or a personal development plan.
All right.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Stuff. So there are and apart from that, what I'm going to do is, as I mentioned to you earlier, I'm going to send you 1 or 2 links for these tests. So my suggestion is, when you do these tests, take a screenshot of it, which we will put in the assignment, because these are tests that you are doing to understand your personality, your gap areas, your weakness areas, and those are things that we will use to put into the actual assignment that we do. Okay. So in this case, when we look at develop a plan to show how targets will be achieved, we are looking at utilizing something called SMART as a terminology to try and define our targets from the SWOT, which are weakness areas, and how do we develop them, develop the weaknesses into areas of strength or opportunities, will be actually the SMART plan that we will put together, and that will address your merit task. Okay.
Right.
So let me send this to you on the email after the session, and then what we will do is we will catch up on a bit of recap to see what were your results of the personality test that you have done, and also try and then develop your SWOT and your skills audit and use that as a starting point to create a PDP.
All right.
Okay, brilliant. Any questions on this, Aman, so far?
No, you've explained it good so far, sir. No questions.
Good stuff. I will mark your assignment this week, and then we'll send you a final grade on the email. I think you've sent me a revision already, so I will get that boxed in between today and tomorrow, and then send over a final grade for you for that assignment.
Great.
Good stuff. So I will catch up with you. I've sent you a couple of invites for this particular unit, so we'll catch up on Tuesdays at 3 o'clock. And then conduct this session so that we can try and bring it to some sort of a closure within the month of March itself.
That's great.
Okay. And some reading material, I don't know, I'm not seeing Moodle right now, but I'm going to try and email you the reading material along with the links and these templates. And if there is nothing on the Moodle, then I will upload some of the stuff that I'm sending you on email so that you have it as a reference material for your self-study as well.
Right. That's great.
Good stuff. Thanks for joining in this session, Aman, and I will catch up with you next week.
Thank you very much, bye, sir.
Okay, take care.